Hello and welcome back to another Walking Dead video, and today we'll be doing my rewrites for The Walking Dead Season 9 Part 2. So where we left off with Part 1, we had some big changes. First of all, Rick is still around, and Magna died in episode 6. Jesus survived a show death, and Oceanside was destroyed. We also have some big characters that are still around, like Carl and Andrea has replaced Michonne, while Michonne replaces Carol at the Kingdom, as some big deaths have already happened, like Carol is already dead, and Tara is already dead too. Just remember, this is a quick overview, so if you want to know how these things happened, go and click on the icon on the top right for the Walking Dead Rewrites playlist, where you can go watch everything up until now to be fully up to date with everything. As I have not mentioned all changes, so I do recommend you go back and at least watch part 1 of season 9. And as always, remember, I have 3 rules with my rewrites. I cannot make this complete fan fiction. I have to do deaths. I can change them, but deaths have to happen. And when an actor leaves, I have to also remove that character. But enough blubbering on, let's jump into the rewrites. Episode 7 picks up the group at the graveyard, and that is Andrea, Aaron, Jesus, Daryl, Yumiko, Kelly, Connie, Eugene, and a dead Magna. This follows the intro of episode 9, with the group escaping with Magna's body barely in time as the Whisperers and Walkers close in. We get a shot of a Whisperer opening the gate and intro. We then pick back up with Negan in Alexandria, and like in episode 8, he's playing with a ball and he throws the ball too far beyond the cell. He goes up to a cell door and realizes it is unlocked. He picks up the ball, then decides nah, then picks up the seal and then leaves the door. Before leaving, all the scenes are the same with Negan around Rick and Andrea's place and just kind of sneaking around Alexandria. And as he's trying to escape, he is found by Judith. She sees him, and like in the show, she lets him go and lets him keep the compass. Then over to Rick's story, and they just get to Hilltop at the gate. As Rick is more or less a kind of war hero, there's less of a struggle to let him in. Even the people at Hilltop who don't like outsiders, when they realise Rick Grimes is there, they still open the door. Once inside, Enid and Carl embrace each other, and she talks about how worried she was about Carl. Rick and Sadiq start talking about Rosita and head towards the infirmary. Then they hear shouting, and Rick looks back at his carriage and he sees Henry being pulled out. The Hilltop guard takes Henry's weapon, as there are no weapons allowed on the grounds of Hilltop, and Henry snatches it back and punches the guard in the face. Henry is then grappled and pinned to the floor. Before things can escalate any further, Rick steps in and calms everyone down. Rick is then told by the guard to keep his stray in line or he goes in a cell. Rick then chastises Henry for coming, and Carl and Enid see what's happening and volunteer to watch him. We then go back to Daryl and his group on the way back to the Hilltop. All the scenes are the same, with the just slightly different characters, i.e. Yumiko's the one that's distraught, not Aaron, and Magna's the one dead, not Jesus. The scenes are the same, with our group going to the bridge, finding Walkers and Whisperers, killing them all, and meeting Lydia. Andrew will take Michonne's scenes and is very hesitant to take Lydia along, but Whisperers/Walkers are on their heels still, and they have to leave, so they end up taking Lydia with them. The scene ends with all the weapons straight across the bridge being picked up by Walkers as they go over the bridge. We then jump back to Negan and we follow his plot from episode 9, basically scene for scene. So we see him eating, drinking, losing his food, then getting sick because he's drinking out of a ravine, struggling to find food, basically generally just surviving. We then see Negan get attacked by a dog when he's trying to get a new leather jacket, and he has to outsmart and outrun the dogs. After a while, he is walking through the woods and he starts getting the feeling of being watched. He then hears the iconic whistling, and then he suddenly gets tackled. Back to Hilltop, and we start seeing people getting a bit worried about the group being gone for a bit too long. They said he'd only be gone for maybe a couple hours, Jesus did, but it's been more or less a day at this point. we catch up with Luke, who is talking to some Hilltoppers about wanting to help out, and we see Carl, Enid and Henry walk over. Carl quickly agrees that somebody should go out and look for the missing people. Henry, very eager, butts in and talks about how he wants to help, but Carl says no. Henry keeps pushing, but the guard from earlier tells Henry to shut up, and the grown-ups are talking. He then proceeds to mock Henry for sneaking in and being way too eager to do anything, and Henry lashes out once again and is promptly subdued and taken to a cell. After Henry is taken away, Carl and Luke agree to be the ones to go leave Hilltop, as most of the Hilltop guards don't really see the point of going out to go help Alexandrians and Saviors. We then cut back to Negan, and he is currently in the back of a carriage in a convoy. Looking around, Negan sees a bunch of Saviors, and they are heading towards Sanctuary. We then see Laura, an ex-Savior, and she comments to Negan, "Oh, you're finally awake." Gabriel has all of Alexandria looking for him. Negan asks, "Where is Lucille?" but Laura ignores the question. The convoy then abruptly stops as Saviors ahead start calling out walkers on the road, and Laura and her Saviors go off to go clear the walkers, leaving Negan alone to try and escape. This quickly escalates though as the situation gets worse as whisperers start coming from the trees and walkers start coming from all around. Everyone then starts crying and panicking as people are getting picked off one by one, leaving Negan to try and escape as quick as possible to survive. He manages to escape and frantically looks for Lucille and eventually finds her. While escaping, Laura is fighting off some walkers, and just before she kills one, her hand is grabbed, the knife removed, she is pulled to the ground and bitten. Negan thinks about leaving, but he decides to go back. He ends up saving Laura, getting the walkers off them, and while escaping, Negan looks back and he sees this monster of a walker slowly walking towards them within the horde. We then get back to Hilltop and we finally see Daryl and his group return with Lydia. Rick and Enid greet the group at the gates, and Jesus welcomes Rick quickly to the Hilltop and mentions it could be under better circumstances. Enid then asks the group where is Carl, as he left to go find them but hasn't returned with them. Like in the show, Lydia is taken to the cells, and all the same scenes will happen with our characters like Daryl, Andrea, and Jesus interrogating her. It will be just like the show, but Andrea takes Michonne scenes and Jesus will take Tara's scenes. They get nowhere and they end up leaving to talk to Rick about it. Rick says that they should maybe just try and talk to her and take the lesser aggressive route, as it probably will not work as she's a child and will just get scared and shut down. Rick then says he'll go talk to Lydia, and whilst this happened, Daryl sees Henry in the other cell and takes him out to go ask him what happened, like in the show. Daryl threatens he'll take Henry back to the kingdom if he does not get his act together, and Henry apologises but tries to explain that he's really frustrated that the Hilltop is so against everyone and wants to be isolationists after everything that happens. Daryl tells Henry that Hilltop does not own him anything and that his brother does not put them in debt to Henry and to join the communities. Daryl then tells Henry that he'll be sent back into the cell after a couple of minutes. We then see Rick's conversation with Lydia, and this is much like Daryl's second conversation with Lydia, where it is Rick taking Daryl's scenes. All the scenes are more or less the same, with Lydia being a bit more reactive to the food, the water and the medicine, and giving out some information. Rick finds out little information like why they wear masks, do they have names, they have no home, and stuff like that. A lot like Daryl did in his first attempt. Daryl then returns with Henry and asks Rick about how's it going, and Rick says it's going slow. Daryl then goes screw this and starts trying to aggressively interrogate Lydia again, which then prompts a Henry having to step in and ends up punching Daryl. This throws off Daryl, and Daryl then focuses on Henry and takes him back to his cell and says, "You will rot in there," as Rick drags him away. The scene then ends with Henry and Lydia talking to each other and Lydia thanking Henry. We then get a scene with Aaron, Andrea, Eugene, Rosita and Yumiko getting ready to head back to Alexandria with Magna's body. And Rick tells Andrea that he wishes he can go, but he should stay to sort this out a little longer, as we see the group leaving. We then cut back to Negan with a bitten Laura as they run to the gates of Alexandria, where they are greeted by Gabriel, and Negan is promptly arrested and taken back to his cell while Laura is rushed to the infirmary. The last scene of this episode is where we see Carl and Luke out in the woods looking for Daryl's group, not knowing that Daryl's group is basically already on their way back. We see them walking through the woods a lot like Luke and Alden did, and they see a bunch of walkers. This is when they meet Alpha, and we get the scene with Alpha saying the trail ends here, shot for shot. End of episode 7. Episode 8 mostly follows the plot of episode 10 and starts with Lydia and Henry talking about Lydia's past, and we get the flashback to Alpha's origin. We get the intro and then open with Jesus, Enid, Connie and Kelly with a bunch of Hilltoppers looking for Carl and Luke. The scenes are same in the show, with them seeing walkers and wondering if they are whisperers or not. After taking out the walkers, Jesus orders everyone to go back, as it's too dangerous to continue searching as it's getting dark soon. Enid is very vocal against it, but Connie and Kelly calm her down, and they all eventually to head back to the hilltop. Back at Henry and Lydia, we see them talking more, and then we get more flashbacks, and this is mostly, all the flashbacks are the same as in the show with no changes, with them seeing the supposed past of Lydia. Henry though starts opening up about the kingdom, and Daryl bursts into the cells and takes Henry out, like in the show, and we get the scene all the same as the show, with Daryl and Henry arguing that they were using Henry to get to Lydia after realising that Lydia was talking to Henry. Same as the show, Henry ends up just walking off. Later, Rick finds Daryl pacing around the entrance to the cellar and asks if he is okay. Daryl responds that he needs answers, and Rick tells him that he can't get him in this state and he should go and rest and process Magna's death. Rick tells Daryl that he will take it from here and then goes in. Rick sits down in front of Lydia and tells her that he needs her help and he can help her if she helps him. Rick says how his son is missing, and Lydia mentions if Alpha has him, he is already dead. We then get a flashback, again giving us more of Alpha's origin, and Lydia talks about how young she was when it happened. The scene ends with Rick giving Lydia some water, but before she lashes out and tries to attack Rick, and Rick uses his cane to sweep her off her feet. We then cut to Enid freaking out about Carl still missing and trying to sneak out of the hilltop, but gets caught by Connie and Kelly, who are planning on doing the same. They decide to team up and sneak out of the hilltop together. However, they are not as sneaky as they thought, as Daryl sees them and decides to follow them to see what they are going to do. Some time passes and Rick goes back to Lydia's cell with a stick, and the same as the show, but with Rick instead of Daryl, Rick talks about how she noticed her arm and that a stick like this could do something like that. He noticed how Lydia immediately noticed the stick when he walked in, and she is being abused by her dad. But as in the show, Lydia corrects him and say that is his mum doing that to make her stronger. We then see a flashback yet again of how supposedly Lydia's dad died, and Rick tells her that he wants to build a new world and that she is welcome to join, and what her mum did was wrong. We then cut to Enid, Connie and Kelly out in the woods looking for Carl and Luke. Still no sign of them though, and Kelly says maybe it's time to go back, but Enid is still keen to keep looking. Some walkers get the jump on them, and one walker ends up grabbing Enid and goes in to bite her, but is shot before it could bite her. Daryl comes in and helps the group fight off the remaining walkers. Daryl then confronts the group about how much of a bad idea it is to go out and look for Carl and Luke in the nighttime, but Connie manages to calm him down, and Daryl says that they should go back and they should know better. Enid tells Daryl that she is not going back and she will keep looking for Carl, and if she's going there alone, she's more likely to get hurt. And Daryl, noticing that Enid probably won't come back, reluctantly agrees to come along. As Enid says, it's safer for Daryl to come along than for her to continue searching alone. So the scene ends with Daryl agreeing to join the group for safety in numbers. We then come back to the hilltop and we see Henry going in to the cellar to talk to Lydia, and all of the scenes about those two bonding are exactly the same, with them two talking, Lydia then being taken out and being shown the hilltop, and the eating worms scene. The scene, as in the show, ends with the two going back and Lydia asking Henry to stay, and them two holding hands at the end. Then morning comes and Rick comes down to feed Lydia. Like in the show, Henry tells Rick that she don't want to be left alone, and Rick asks Lydia some questions. We then get one final flashback and we see the real events of what happened as Lydia cries. Rick just listens and tells her it will be okay. The episode ends with Rick and Henry leaving the cellar talking about why some people should not be parents. We then see Jesus watching over as Daryl, Enid, Connie and Kelly return from a night of searching with no luck. Walkers and Whisperers then come out from the trees, and Jesus calls over to Rick and everyone to get ready. Daryl and his group run to the entrance and manage to get in before it gets cut off. However, Connie was a bit further behind and she had to run into the cornfields to hide. The episode ends with Rick, Jesus and Daryl watching over as we get introduced to Alpha. Episode 9 starts with episode 8 ended with our group looking over at the Whisperers at the entrance at the hilltop. We then see Alpha walking forwards and asking for Lydia. Daryl tells Rick to just hand her over, but Rick is hesitant, knowing what will probably happen to her when she goes back and says no. Alpha then says wrong answer and brings out more Whisperers and Carl and Luke. Rick's eyes widen and starts to panic. He takes a moment to collect his thoughts and then tells Jesus and Daryl that he is going down and everyone should get ready. While the gates are opening, Enid asks, is it true, do they have Carl? And Rick tries to calm her but is unsuccessful before going and meet face to face with Alpha. Henry notices what's going on and tries to save Lydia before it is too late. When Rick and Alpha meet, the first thing Alpha does is comments that she is shocked that he is the leader and he looks too weak to be a leader. Rick mentions how looks can be deceiving, but the conversation quickly turns to Lydia and a trade for Carl. They mention how they both are each other's children, and Alpha tells Rick a child for a child and all can be forgotten. Rick mentions how Alpha is abusing Lydia and that Lydia is safer with him than her. Alpha tells Rick that she is merely making her stronger, but Rick snaps back and says abusing a child is not how to do it. Alpha again tries to push for the trade for Lydia back, but is cut off by the crying baby. The mother is unsuccessfully able to quiet it, and Alpha orders the baby to be dropped as walkers come in. Just like in the show though, Connie comes out from the fields and saves the baby. We get the scene where Connie is trying to escape with the death bit and everything is exactly the same in the field, but she is saved. But instead of Daryl and that lot, she is saved by Jesus, Enid and Kelly in the field, and they all sneak back to the tunnel near the back of the hilltop. The focus then goes back to Alpha and Rick is still against giving Lydia back to Alpha. Alpha, seeing Rick won't budge, orders the Whisperer that is holding Carl to kill him. As the Whisperer is preparing to do it, Rick shouts and agrees to give up Lydia for Carl. Rick walks back to the hilltop defeated to go and tell everyone what is going to happen, and they need to go and get Lydia. When they go see Lydia, they see that Henry is trying to save her, and Henry steps in the way and tries to stop Daryl and Rick from taking her. Rick tells Henry that he has no choice and that they need to give Lydia back as Alpha is going to kill Carl if they don't. Lydia, hearing this, offers to go and Henry asks is she sure, and she tells him yes. The scene ends with Lydia kissing Henry goodbye. They then walk off to do the transaction. Alpha gets Lydia back and Rick gets Carl and Luke back. Scene ends with Enid and Rick hugging Carl. We then jump over to the kingdom and see Michonne return in and seeing Ezekiel getting ready to go get something for the fair. This will follow the plot of episode 11 with them trying to get the light bulb, and it's more or less exactly the same with Michonne taking Carol's scenes and not being impressed that they're going to risk their lives to go watch a movie. Same as the episode, we have our group playing music to go draw the walkers out. They get in there, they get the light bulb, but Jerry drops it, and they have to go further into the cinema to go retrieve it and fight more walkers. While Ezekiel tries to get a poster, however the music stops, and the walkers start to return, and the plot then becomes about them trying to escape the cinema with the bulb intact, and no one dying. This plot ends the same with the group successfully grabbing the bulb, and we then see Michonne and Ezekiel going back to the kingdom with Ezekiel laughing and Michonne not looking too impressed while holding the bulb. We then go back to the hilltop and we see Jesus and Rick talking about the communities and how Hilltop has a place in the bigger world. Jesus is still hesitant about joining Rick's communities, but Rick gives him an offer. He offers Hilltop to come to the fair and see what the communities has to offer and see if it's worth Hilltop joining or not. They can come and not join. Jesus agrees to come to the fair, but just going there. They're not going to join or really offer any resources themselves. We then see Daryl looking for Henry, but to no avail. He bumps into Connie and asks if she has seen Henry. She says yes, she saw him packing and assumed that Daryl was taking him back to the kingdom. He says no, and he's probably gone off to go and save Lydia. The two go and prepare themselves, and the scene ends with them two leaving Hilltop to go find Henry. We then cut to Alpha and Lydia talking about the Hilltop while walking in a herd of walkers. They then get to their camp where we properly meet Beta for the first time, and he is stood there with Henry, which he states he found following them since Hilltop. Alpha talks about killing him before Lydia jumps in and tries to stop her. Alpha gives in to Lydia and then orders Beta to tie him up. Some time passes and night has fallen. Henry is just looking around and he can see the Whisperers making masks, getting food, and controlling the walkers. Lydia ends up getting close and Henry and Lydia start talking. Lydia calls Henry a dumbass for coming, and we quickly move focus to Alpha and Beta watching on. They are talking about Henry, and Beta mentions that Henry and Lydia are making Alpha look weak, and they do not want the unwanted attention at this point in time. Alpha agrees and tells Beta to deal with it before they both walk over, and Henry being untied and held down by Beta, while Alpha gives Lydia a knife and tells Lydia to kill him. The episode ends with Lydia walking towards Henry with a knife. Episode 10 picks up right where episode 9 ended, with Lydia walking towards Henry with a knife, but says no and throws it to the ground. Alpha then orders Beta to kill him, and while Beta is raising his arm to go for the slash, he is shot in the chest with an arrow and stumbles back. Walkers then start to get attracted and start to attack the Whisperer camp. In the chaos, some Whisperers get bit and eaten, and the focus from Alpha switches to the Whisperers and controlling the walkers again. As all the chaos is going around, Lydia and Henry try to escape and are found by Daryl and Connie. Daryl is against taking Lydia, but Henry is saying no, and Daryl doesn't want to fight at this point, so he just agrees. We then get the intro, and we are back at Alexandria with Andrea, Aaron, Rosita, Eugene, and Gabriel preparing for the trip to the kingdom. The plot starts with Magna's funeral, which is like Jesus' funeral. We get Gabriel doing the ceremony, and we get some saviors from the sanctuary there to give their respects, and we see that Laura survived her bite and amputation. After the service, Andrea and Aaron go to see out the saviors and Yumiko as they are heading back to the sanctuary to prepare themselves for the trip. Andrea then walks over to go and see Negan, and talk about his escape. Like Michonne does in the show, the conversation is basically the same, with Andrea telling Negan the only reason he came back is because the world spat him out and there's nothing left for him out there. Negan mentions how he could have just not saved Laura, but Andrea tells Negan that he only saved her so he can get back into Alexandria. We then cut over to the kingdom and we see they're almost ready for the affair, and Michonne is walking around and she sees Jerry busted up with a message. Then we cut to see them all in the big amphitheater talking about what to do after reading the message. It is the message from the highwayman. Just like in the show, they talk about that the fair is very important for the kingdom and that they need to deal with it now. The scenes are almost the same, it's just Carol's scenes are replaced with Michonne. Instead of talking about saviors, they talk about maybe being exiles from what's left of Oceanside and the Hilltop. The scene ends with Jerry going off to go form a militia. We then go over to Rick with Jesus, Carl, Enid, Sadiq, Luke and Kelly with a bunch of Hilltoppers going from the Hilltop to the kingdom. Same as the show, the group gets stuck and have to go clear a blockage. During this, Sadiq notices Enid is a little different and confronts her and tells her is she pregnant, and jokes she is glowing. Enid confesses that she is pregnant, but she has not told Carl yet. Sadiq quietly congratulates her, and we see Carl looking confused and asking what are they talking about to Rick. Back to Daryl's group, and they are still trying to escape the Whisperers. Connie notices a tall building and points it out. Daryl agrees it's a good idea and they head to the building. Once inside, they start boarding up the building and preparing for a fight. Connie and Daryl go over a plan to lure the Whisperers in and then sneak out. They talk about Lydia and how she shouldn't stay / should stay, but their conversation is cut short by Henry calling out that the Whisperers are here. Cut to Michonne, Ezekiel, Jerry and some Kingdomers sneaking into the abandoned building to deal with the highwayman. It's exactly the same as the show, with Michonne taking Carol's scenes and the highwayman being convinced to help the kingdom with the idea of movies. Then we once again go back to Rick and everyone from the Hilltop travelling to the fair. They get stuck once again by walkers this time. Jesus and Rick both spring to action and break into two groups to deal with the walkers. However, more walkers come and they are quickly overrun. There is a bit of drama with our characters maybe getting overrun, but the highwaymen come in and save them. The group then are escorted to the fair safely. We then go finally back to Daryl once again, watching the Whisperers coming in. Daryl is shocked to see Beta once again, who took an arrow to the chest but seems fine. Beta sees Daryl and moves the hood to go and attack the building. Everything is the same as the show, with Lydia and Dog being hidden as Daryl, Connie and Henry prepare to fight. Once the Whisperers at the bottom of the stairs, Beta knows it's a trap. However, the Horde seems to find no issue and everything climbs over the stairs, Whisperers and all. Once inside, everything is more or less the same, but with more attackers. Daryl is almost overrun, but is quickly able to take out all the small walkers and Whisperers. The fight with Beta then starts, and it is exactly the same, with Beta almost winning most of the fight, but only loses because Daryl outsmarts him and tackles him into a lift. Then we go back to Henry's group, and Henry and Connie are more or less overrun, and Henry is injured in the fight. Lydia ends up joining the fight and saving Henry before Daryl comes in and gets the group out of there. They try and bandage Henry as quickly as they can, but they are being swarmed by walkers. Henry asks where they're going, and Daryl says the kingdom, as that's the closest and not compromised like the Hilltop. They exit the building while it's still being flooded, and we then cut to Negan looking out of his cell window, watching Andrea and everyone leaving for the fair. At the kingdom, Rick and Jesus, with the help of the highwayman, finally arrive and are welcomed by Michonne and Ezekiel, who are shocked to see Jesus and some of the Hilltoppers have decided to come to the fair. While unpacking, Enid decides and goes over and pulls Carl aside to tell him that she is pregnant. Carl is filled with joy, and Rick and everyone else congratulate Enid and Carl. After that, we cut back to the lift shaft and we see Beta getting up pissed just like in episode 13. This episode ends with Beta going back to Alpha and the Whisperers. We see Alpha and the Whisperers stood around some of their dead from earlier, waiting and quietly chanting. As the dead start to rise, the chanting slightly gets louder. We see that there's a myriad of weapons laying across the ground in front of the dead. Alpha and Beta watch on as these fresh walkers turn, get up, and some of them pick up weapons. Then we get episode 11, which is the fair episode. This episode starts with a montage of that couple going through the years and then getting ready to go to the fair to have Alpha kill them on the way. But they are from Alexandria, not Hilltop. We get the intro and then we see Ezekiel's speech to everyone about the promise of the communities and working together to help to build a better future. We then see, after the speech, the gates open and more people arrive, the people from Alexandria this time. Ezekiel, Rick, Michonne, and Carl and Jesus go to welcome them. Rick, Andrea, and Judith embrace each other before Carl tells Andrea that he'll be a father. Aaron and Jesus say hi to each other, and Aaron is surprised that Jesus and Hilltop came. Jesus says he's a little surprised himself, and that is little steps. Aaron then invites him to go and look around together. Michonne is waiting for Henry as he is still not arrived and is worried. Ezekiel tries to comfort her, and then Dog runs in. Michonne then sees Daryl and his group, and we get the scene where Michonne and Henry hug, and it's basically the exact same scene as Carol and Henry, just Michonne taking Carol's scenes. Daryl is thanked, and Lydia is introduced to Michonne and Ezekiel. Cut to Daryl telling Rick, Michonne, Ezekiel, Jesus, Aaron, and Andrea about the Whisperers, while Henry, Judith, and Lydia watch on. Rick mentions has to be a real threat, and Jesus agrees, and mentions a defensive pact for all the communities, and it is time for Hilltop to join the others, as if Hilltop stands alone, it is sure to fall. Jesus talks about how the past is the past. Aaron asks, is he sure? And Jesus tells everyone that he can't spend ages waiting for Maggie to return. He needs to step up and be the leader that Hilltop needs now, not keep it ready for when Maggie comes back. Everyone celebrates and Jesus shakes hands with Rick. We then get the scenes with Henry showing Lydia around the fair, and it's all the same with Enid and Sadiq teaching people first aid and Eugene getting dunked. All of Carol's scenes will be replaced with Michonne when Henry and Lydia are talking to Michonne and Ezekiel. We then cut to Carl and Enid getting Carol apples while talking about baby names. Rick soon joins in the conversation and suggests Rick Jr. Enid, though, is adamant it will be a girl and suggests other girl names. The scene ends with Carl and Enid walking away while Rick jokingly saying, think about it. Carl nods and then we cut to the gate and see Daryl with some of the saviors like Yumiko and others, with Andrea, Jesus, and some Hilltoppers getting ready to go to the Hilltop to protect Hilltop as they think it's compromised. We also see Henry saying goodbye to Daryl, but also Michonne, who agreed to go also to help. Jesus talks about wanting to go, but says he should stay behind to iron out the defensive pact with Rick and to make sure Hilltop has a place in these connected communities. The group leaving are Daryl, Yumiko, Andrea, and Michonne, plus some Hilltoppers and saviors. On the trail back to the Hilltop, our group find Ozzy and his highwayman at one of Alexandria's wagons. Andrea takes Michonne's scenes and Michonne takes Carol's scenes. The scenes being more or less the same, with them asking about what happened, and Ozzy talking about that this isn't the dead, people did this. Daryl finds some tracks and tells Yumiko to take the rest of the group, which is the Hilltoppers and the Saviors, to continue onwards to Hilltop, while Daryl, Andrea, and Michonne go to investigate the tracks. We then go back to the kingdom and see Henry and Ezekiel walking away from the gate to see Alpha lurking around in the background. All the scenes are the same, with Eugene and Rosita talking about the radio and getting it set up and the risks involved, and Henry looking for Lydia to find her, and all the scenes are the same, with her not being happy and them kissing before Henry notices the noise and says he has to go fix it. We also get the scene with Rick, Jesus, and Aaron talking about setting up the defensive pact and how Jesus wants to have what's best for the Hilltop. Rick tells Jesus that he will be a great leader. As the same in the show, Alpha meets Ezekiel and says she's from Hilltop and she's looking for clothing. Ezekiel talks about it's a shame that he doesn't know anybody anymore, and then takes her off screen to go and help her. Some time has passed by and it's now the late evening. We see that some walkers are actually starting to get close to the kingdom, and the guards with Rosita's help are getting ready to go fend them off. Rick, Carl and Enid notice the ruckus and then go and see what is going on. They talk to Rosita and she talks about how the highwaymen are clearly not doing their jobs and somebody needs to go out there and clear off the walkers before they draw in more walkers. Rick and Carl both offer their help to Rosita and talk how they're getting a bit bored of the fair. Rosita talks about how it should be better if one group deals with the walkers, but they also need to get the highwaymen back on track and another group should go out and fetch them. Carl volunteers and says it's a quick job. He will go with a small group to head to their camp, get them back on track, and come back. Enid says she will look after Judith, and they don't need to worry. This scene ends with Carl with a small group leaving to go to the highwayman camp, while Rick and Rosita with another group go to take out the walkers at the walls. We then follow Rick, Rosita and their group going out to take out some walkers. They get rid of the first ones with no real issue, but more start to come from the trees. They start to notice these walkers are acting a little different, and Rosita spots that they have weapons and calls out whisperers. The group gets in defensive position and tries to take them out ranged. However, these whisperers keep coming no matter how many shots from arrows and bows and strikes they are getting to the chest. Our group starts to be picked off as they realise these ain't whisperers, they are some new type of walkers. They try to retreat back to the kingdom, but they get cut off by Beta. The scene ends with Beta charging towards Rick and Rosita and what's left of their group. We are now in the cinema and the movie starts. We see Lydia sitting down and waiting for Henry, but he doesn't come. The movie starts and Lydia quickly forgets and starts to enjoy the movie until Alpha sits down next to her. We then see Alpha look over and shushes at her. Back with Carl and we see their group still looking for the highwayman. Night has fallen and they've got to the camp and seen it's been ransacked. They end up finding a trail and follow it. The group is then quickly jumped by Daryl, Andrea and Michonne, who all seem on edge and ask what are they doing out there. It seems like they've been hiding from something in the woods. The group, now united, try to make it back to the kingdom, but get attacked by walkers. Carl's men get quickly dispatched and it is just the four of them left. The group is then surrounded by Beta and the Whisperers. Beta demands that they drop the weapons, but Daryl and his group do not comply. Beta then walks back into his herd and walks out and throws a bloodied and bruised Rick on the ground. He then demands drop weapons again and puts his knife to Rick's throat. Everyone quickly drops their weapons and then Alpha appears, rubbing her knife on her leg and talking about how she was held up. Alpha talks about her camp and the way of the Whisperers. Andrea tells Alpha that Lydia has been granted asylum and Alpha asks for her name. Rick will take all of Daryl's scenes and he is the one asked to go with Alpha. Rick is then picked up by Beta and thrown towards Alpha, and Alpha and Rick go on. They end up at a clearing near a cliff, and then we see a massive horde of walkers, and Alpha tells Rick that this horde will be let loose if they come over into her land, and she has marked the borders. We then see that Lydia survived her encounter with Alpha, and Alpha tells Rick that she hopes that they can protect her daughter, but she believes that she will get killed. Rick is then let to go back to his people, and we then cut to see Alpha later at a camp crying with Beta. Beta walks off, and another Whisperer sees Alpha crying. Alpha summons him over and kills him. We then have Rick meet back with the group and travelling back to the kingdom where they see Sadiq. They untie him and Sadiq points towards the clearing. The group leave the clearing and see Pikes on the hill. We then see 6 heads and they are all the same, with Ozzy, the Saviour, Tammy and the kids from Hilltop and Kingdom. We then see Michonne breaking down crying and we see the first head being Henry. We then get a cut to the kingdom where we see Gabriel and Eugene asking about someone who's missing, and the second head is Rosita. Rick sees the last head and runs over to Carl, shouting at him to not look. He then turns around Carl to shield him from what just happened. We then cut back to the kingdom to see Judith looking around alone. Jerry comes up and asks if she's okay, and she says she cannot find Enid. We then cut back and see that Enid is the last head on the spike. The episode ends with Sadiq telling everyone at the kingdom about the story of how, even at the end, everyone tried to defend each other. The episode ends with a shot of Carl and Rick stood at the pikes. Episode 12 starts with Ezekiel's speech of how the kingdom fell, and because of the lack of resources and the weather, the cold and wet came in and rot spread. This episode starts with the group getting ready and leaving the kingdom for the last time. Now on the road, our group sees a lone walker walking in a nearby field, and Carl notices and starts to berate Lydia about them, saying, "Is that one of us watching them?" Just like Alden in episode 16, and Rick stops him. The people that are travelling from the kingdom to the other communities are Rick, Carl, Daryl, Andrea, Yumiko, Jesus, Aaron, and all the people from the kingdom, which are Ezekiel, Michonne, Jerry, and Lydia. Ezekiel and Jerry talk about how the storm is coming and they might not have enough time to get there. We then cut to Alexandria, and the plot was almost exactly the same as episode 16, and we have Gabriel and Eugene dealing with the preparations of Alexandria to deal with the storm. Back with the travellers, Lydia sneaks off to go find a walker and try and kill herself. Michonne stops her, however, and tells her that Henry wouldn't want this, and reassures her, telling that she does not blame Lydia for the death of Henry, and that don't listen to Carl. They both walk back to our group, and here is Ezekiel, Jesus, Jerry, Rick, and Aaron talking about the storm and how they need to find shelter faster. The group come to the decision that they need to cross Alpha's borders, because if they don't, they will not make it back to the communities in time. Back at Alexandria, and we see everyone hunkered down and Negan having the time of his life, being able to talk to people and annoy people. He keeps talking to Gabriel about how he is shocked that he's the leader, and the last time he remembered him, he was this creepy priest. All the scenes are more or less the same from episode 16, minus Rosita, as she's already dead. And Sadiq is a lot more quiet, as he is still shaken up by the fair and has just returned from his stay from the Hilltop. Judith's scenes are the same, with Judith being worried about Dog, and Negan tries to comfort her. Negan then comments on a weird noise, and Gabriel tells him to shut up, before Eugene tells Gabriel he is correct. Eugene looks up at the roof, and then the roof falls in. Back to the travelling group as they travel across the border into Alpha's territory. As the same as the show, they are struggling, but not with snow this time, though rain and wind has just set in from the storm. Our group end up at a river, and with the rain coming down the wind, the river is currently incrossable except for one small rickety bridge. Our group have to slowly get across the bridge while walkers come in and attack them. Same as the show, during all this chaos and everyone getting across, Lydia splits off yet again, but it is this time found by Carl. Lydia tries to get Carl to kill her, but same as the show with Carol, Carl takes the knife away from her, says he won't kill her, and he leads her back. As the weather starts to get worse, it starts to topple over some of the wagons, making our group have to leave some of the stuff behind to try and get across the river and escape the oncoming walkers. Back at Alexandria, and Gabriel comes up to the plan to travel to the other houses as their current building has been compromised. While travelling in almost hurricane winds, Judith runs off after she hears Dog. Negan follows her, and as in the show, he gets injured with a gash on the leg. He ends up finding and saving both Judith and the dog before eventually making it back to the house. Some time has passed, and we see that our travelling group made it to a makeshift shelter for the storm. We can clearly see that they have lost most of their supplies and possessions they had from the kingdom because they didn't really have a proper shelter. The group seem a bit down after losing almost everything from the kingdom during the storm, but they are thankful they were able to find shelter and survive the storm. Once they were outside Alpha's territory, everyone cheers up a little, feeling more secure and no longer at risk. However, everyone starts to hear whispering and walkers. We quickly realise that they were spotted, and Alpha has sent a horde out to go and take down the communities. Daryl suggests the group split up and divert the horde for as long as they can so that everyone else can get back to the hilltop and have time to prepare for the horde. We then see Rick, Daryl, Carol and Michonne ride out on the few horses that remain. The riders then successfully manage to divert the horde slightly as Daryl picks off any whisperers he sees trying to change the direction of the horde. We then see that Beta is inside the horde and he ends up moving the horde directly towards Rick, cutting him off from the other riders. Rick is then chased by the horde and is quickly surrounded by them. The walkers start to come in and they start to claw and attack the horse with weapons. One walker tries to pull Rick off, but the horse bucks and throws Rick onto a pipe, and the episode ends with Rick passing out, impaled on a pike. Like at the end season 9 episode 4. Episode 13 is the final episode and starts with Rick hallucinating in the hospital until he sees helicopters and he is told to wake up. He wakes up and he is on the pipe surrounded by walkers. He pulls himself off the pipe and struggles back to the horse as Alpha's horde comes in. As in the show, Rick is trying to lead the walkers away and it keeps falling in and out of consciousness. We then see Carl, Daryl and Michonne trying to get the walkers off Rick and trying to get back to him. However, Beta is having none of it and keeps leading the horde directly after Rick, keeping Daryl and his group at bay. Rick eventually gets to a cabin where he gets off and he tries to go and band himself up and ends up passing out. Rick then sees Shane, and as the same in the show, he talks about Judith and being sorry about what happened. Shane tells him to wake up, and when Rick wakes up, he sees that the door is being opened by the walkers. Rick shoots a couple before crawling out of a small hole in the back of the cabin, getting back on his horse and riding away. Back with Daryl, Carl and Michonne, and things get worse as Beta splits the horde into two. Daryl and Carl try and control the second horde, and Daryl orders Michonne to go back to go get help from the convoy, or if they're at the community, from the communities. Michonne then rides off as Daryl reassures Carl that Rick knows what he's doing and he'll be okay. Back at Rick, and we see he is trying to lead Horde 1 away as best as he can, and he ends up passing out yet again. We then have the scene between him and Herschel where he talks about how sorry he is about everything that happened, and Herschel tells him it's okay, and the scene ends with him being told to wake up. He wakes up and then passes out again, and he is back in the hospital where he goes through the door and meets Laurie with the Sea of the Dead. The scene is the same as Sasha's and ends with Laurie telling him to wake up one more time. With Michonne, she finally catches up to Ezekiel, Andrew and the convoy as they get to the hilltop. She tells everyone what's happened and they need to prepare, and how Rick has been injured. Andrea starts planning about what they should do as Jesus gets the hilltop ready for a fight. Andrea tells Aaron what they have in infantry, and Jerry mentions how the bridge is how they're going to cross over to the hilltop. If they take out the bridge, Alpha's horde will not be able to get to hilltop as easily and will either stop the horde or buy them more time. So they come to the plan to try and weaken the bridge so that when the horde walks over, the bridge will collapse, fall into the river, and some of the horde will be destroyed, and if they don't get destroyed, they have to turn back and retreat. Everyone from both the kingdom and the hilltop travel to the bridge to try and remove as many supports as possible to weaken it. Jesus then shows up with some dynamite that he's been holding at the hilltop for almost a decade at this point and mentions they might be a little unstable. Andrew says they might still work, and they start setting up the dynamite at the supports. The Whisperers then attack and a fight starts. The dangers of the Walkers and the Whisperers are a little too much, and as our group have very little ammo, some few shots are fired and they have to pull back. The shooting draws both hordes towards the bridge. Rick hears it and rides towards the bridge and sees that the bridge is almost ready to go, but the dynamite hasn't been planted yet. His horse is then suddenly attacked by a whisperer and he is pulled off. He struggles, but he eventually is able to overcome the whisperer as Daryl and Carl get there to see that Rick is almost dead and the horde is merging once again, and Rick is now stuck between the bridge and the horde. Rick then fires more shots to make the horde follow him across the bridge. Carl tries to get to Rick, but Daryl stops him and tells him that they can help Rick by hanging back and shooting any whisperers that try to change direction or get too close to Rick himself. Rick collapses as the horde closes in and everyone from all communities comes in and saves him. Andrea embraces Rick and tells him the reason why she loves him so much is because he is a fighter. She then tells him to wake up and Rick is back on the bridge as the horde is coming in, with Daryl and Carl trying to keep the horde away from him as much as possible, but their bolts are running low. Rick gets back up and leads the walkers across the bridge. As the walkers get on the bridge starts to collapse, but not right away. Rick looks back and realizing that most of the horde will probably get past before the bridge collapses. Then, as the bridge collapses, one of the boxes opens and we see the dynamite. Everyone comes back to try and fight off the horde. Andrea then sees what Rick is doing, and her and a bunch of people go off to try and save him. Carl tries to go off with Andrea, but Daryl stops him, and the two stay back on the shore and defend Rick with their arrows. Rick then nods at Daryl and Carl, knowing what he must do to protect everyone. Carl then tries to leave again, but Daryl holds him and tells Carl that he must stay here until the end for Rick. Rick then raises his gun and we see Beta in the horde as the Whisperers discover the dynamite rolling around. Beta tries to divert the horde, but then we cut back to Rick. We see Rick say, "For my family," and shoots the dynamite, blowing up the bridge, taking most of the horde and him with it. We see that most of Alpha's horde is destroyed, but Beta and some of the Whisperers are able to retreat with some of the horde remaining. Andrea is then held back by Jesus and Michonne while she cries out Rick. We then see both Daryl and Carl collapse on the shore, while Daryl tries to comfort Carl, clearly destroyed himself. In the background of the scene, we see the bridge burning behind them and the Walker horde just walking to their death. The episode then ends with a short time jump and we see Jesus talking over the radio to Judith about Rick and what his sacrifice means for everyone and how he will always be remembered as a hero that saved all of the communities, and he finally fulfilled his dream of unifying everyone together. The episode ends with Jesus being hopeful about the future and comforting Judith. The final shots is a close-up of the radio and we hear a woman's voice. Then black. And that is the Season 9 rewrites. And this is where we're going to leave it for this video. So please tell me down below, what did you think about Season 9? And what were your rewrites if you have different rewrites? I'll listen to your thoughts and opinions, everything down below. And make sure to subscribe to the channel so you get notified when Season 10 comes out, because I'm going to warn you right now, Season 10 is going to be pretty big. I have some big things planned for Season 10. But this is it for me today, so if you want more Walking Dead content, please look on the screen. If you want my Season 9 Part 1, look in the top right corner, and I will see you later. So goodbye, peace out, and I'll talk to you in the next video.